here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week is going to be the turn of the guitarist Larry Schemel, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. One-time member of Kill Sybil and also Midnight Movies, The Flesh Eaters, and for a very long time was in Death Valley Girls, but has recently stepped away from the band and is going to do some interesting new projects in 2024. So look, this is the interview. You're going to find out more than you could ever imagine. So anyway, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Larry, it's over to you.
Oh man. Well, it's back in the 70s, and I was born in 68. So I was a little kid coming up in the 70s, and some of the first records I remember hearing and having in my bedroom, and because our parents weren't really rock and roll people, they were more a little older, so they had like maybe some folk records and things like that, Herb Alpert records. So but I did have my two older sisters who were kind of like leading the way. But I do remember in my parents' record collection, they did have a couple of records that I really would listen to over and over again. That was the Beatles' Rubber Soul and the Monkees' second record.
Right.
And I remember like those I was really drawn to. It was the only rock and roll records we had. And so I would listen to them. And I remember, I think it was my oldest sister had bought a Kiss record, and seeing the record cover with Kiss on it and the makeup and putting it on and just the excitement of that music was really that was the kind of the moment where like where I was like, I love this, like whatever's going on here, this is like exciting. And it's like kind of heavy and weird, and the band has all the makeup. I'm into horror movies and stuff, so it all like came together where right there it was like everything I loved was like like all in this package. And
Yes.
and my older sister was also into because she was really into Bowie and Sweet and Bay City Rollers and all that sort of stuff back there and back then, and some of the more pop stuff, Bee Gees and stuff like that. But yeah, the initial catalyst for everything I would say was hearing Kiss was the thing that just like set me off.
Yes, well, absolutely. Actually, it's funny with Bay City Rollers because I did an interview with Les. I did a couple, which was quite sweet because they were such a sort of part of growing up. I didn't particularly like them because they were, a bit, they were just the Bay City Rollers, really, and the young girls liked them. But at the same time, I didn't realize later on, you listen to some of their songs and then you realize where the Ramones probably got a lot of their ideas from with their kind of thumping, kind of anthemic kind of sort of tracks, really. So, and I felt really sorry for poor old Les because they got really done over by their manager, which was just one of those horrible rock and roll stories where, eventually he says, that's it, I'm going. And it's like, but I've got no money. And it's like, no, you've got no money. And it's like, but where's all the money? It's like, you've got no money. And it was then his life spirals down and then continues to spiral down. So that's always a bit unfortunate. So, but yes, there was classic pop. And we also had the Osmonds and David Kelly thrown in, which was very groovy. So what was the age difference between, were there three of you then in the family?
Yeah. So I was the youngest, and Patty was the middle, and Susan was the oldest. And Susan was born in 65, Patty in 67, and I was born in 68. So we are pretty close in age. But Susan was a few years older, so she would she was the one kind of like who was buying records, bring them home, and going to concerts. And so we were really starting to like get a lot of influence from some of the music that she was listening to.
Yes. Were your parents into people like Bob Dylan and Donovan and the folk movement of Peter, Paul and Mary and stuff like that? Were they beatniks?
They were kind of more beatnik. They weren't hippies, they're a little bit older, but they definitely liked, and they were from Brooklyn, New York. They were New York people, and they in the mid 60s they drove their VW van bus across the, typical like 60s fashion. They drove it cross country to the West Coast to like start a life and start a family. And they were into the folk stuff. Like it was like the Limelighters, Kingston Trio, Glenn Yarborough. Those are the records I remember them having. And there was also others, Sinatra and stuff like that mixed in. And but then as in the 70s, especially my mom was really would I remember we'd drive around in her car, and she'd have an 8-track or cassette of, it would be like Janis Joplin, or she even started like some of the rock and roll we were listening to, like Aerosmith and Cheap Trick and stuff like that. But she did and she wasn't like a big Elvis or Beatles fan. She was just like, whatever she heard, she kind of like, oh, I like this or like that. And it was, but generally, like starting out, like I do remember her being really into folk music.
Yes. And what was the household like? Because in the 70s, in the UK, and I'm sort of talking a lot about this to this author who's done a book on Throbbing Gristle. The 70s in the UK was, the political parties were changing all the time. There was this winter of discontent. There was a lot of strikes with 3-day weeks. There was sort of shortage of electricity and all that kind of stuff. But you had Nixon, you had Vietnam, then you had Carter. What was it like for you guys in Brooklyn at this stage?
Oh, so we had already moved. They had already moved from Brooklyn to Seattle. So we were growing up in the Seattle area as kids in the suburbs, and at that point, like in the 70s, like none of that stuff. It was a different climate than the UK for sure, because there was and as kids, it wasn't really like the politics and stuff, where we were very not really aware or involved. And there'd be stuff like, I remember being homesick from school and watching like Jimmy Carter's inauguration, and and I remember my parents being pleased that Jimmy Carter was going to be the new president. And there was stuff going on like the gas crisis and a lot of things happening, and Vietnam was still a pretty fresh kind of thing. It had just kind of ended in the mid 70s, so there was stuff I was aware of as a kid, but it really wasn't but we were kind of unbothered by a lot of that stuff, because we were just like back then, having a family and being in the suburbs, especially in like Washington State and stuff, was pretty there was actually a middle class back then, and we were like living comfortably, and we had a house, and I just remember from those days being really fun being a kid back then, and being really free, and being kind of like left to our own devices, like just without cell phones or any of that stuff. Back then we were just kind of like let loose until night came.
It was frisbees and skateboards, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. So, and it wasn't. So the political landscape and stuff. Yeah, it wasn't really had too much effect on our situation. Or
so when did the guitar come into your life at this stage?
That came in like Patty. She had started playing drums when she was around 13, and our dad got her a full drum set that she had in her room, and she would be in her room practicing.
That must have been so relaxing for the family.
Oh, for sure. I know. Yeah, the neighbors weren't thrilled, but it was okay. They were all kind of accepting of it. Like, as long as she practiced during the day, it was fine. And so I was really interested in playing a instrument, but I didn't, like I had friends, because I didn't start until later in my teens, because I had friends who were also guitar players. And by this point in the early 80s, my friends were already into like Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads and stuff. And they were really, really like 14-year-old kids, like really accomplished players where they could like do all this crazy stuff. And at that point, I was like, wow, it might be too late for me to start playing guitar because I'll never get to that level.
Yes.
But also at that point, I was also really getting into punk rock, and with the help of the older sisters, like bringing home Clash records and the Ramones and stuff, and really starting to like get into that stuff more. And then of course realizing like, oh, I love this music, and you don't have to be a virtuoso to play this kind of music. And if I could still play guitar and play this stuff, I want to do it. And my sister had got me a electric guitar for Christmas around that time. And I remember just like going in my room, and I think I had one of those old like Mel Bay guitar chord books or something, just to kind of learn the basics. And just started strumming along and listening to music. And I didn't have any proper lessons or anything. I never have had. I just sort of self-taught. So I just started playing and bashing out chords. And then what really helped was I would also like play with Patty. She's playing drums, I play guitar, and then it was like kind of all made sense to where like, oh, this would work here. I could actually make a song up and stuff. So
that's fantastic. So when we got to sort of 85, you would have been 16. God, I'm doing the maths, aren't I?
Yeah.
So do you stay on at school at this stage, or do you go on to sort of further education in college? Because the mid 80s, because for me it's kind of shaped. We had the punk and then post-punk, and then you had New Romantics, the kind of the psychobilly stuff. Then there was New Paisley, which was all very exciting, and then you sort of had the goth scene that started to happen, and then out of that kind of 83 onwards, there was the Smiths for 5 years with that indie pop sound, and there was U2 and Echo and the Bunnymen and Julian Cope and people like that. So what was it like? All these kind of very British bands, which were very sort of. There was also that mainstream production stuff like Trevor Horn, with Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Dire Straits and Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, Sade.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it was all very much. But then you would have had Madonna, you'd have had Hall and Oates. Where were you musically going at this stage?
So at that stage, being 16, like for me and also Patty around this time, it was still like we really got into the hardcore punk scene in America, and there was also the more the hardcore UK bands like GBH and Discharge and Exploited that were still kind of some of them were still kind of around at that point, but and at that time, like being into punk, and it was still evolving to where it was getting more fast, and there was the crossover stuff happening, and I was really into anything that was super hyper intense and heavy. At that point, I was like into it. So so there were still bands happening at that time that we'd go to see, would like Black Flag, Husker Du, even bands like the Replacements would be coming around to Seattle, and and also some of the UK bands we'd seen like GBH and like a lot of these bands, also the bigger shows like Susie and the Banshees and U2, and like there was stuff happening. Seattle still wasn't a big place for bands to come, so it was like you would go to shows whenever, whoever it was, we'd go to see these bands. And so at that point I was like just really into the US underground stuff was really happening and really exciting, and there's a lot of around 85, there was also this really weird element of these bands like Butthole Surfers and Scratch Acid and Big Black and stuff starting to kind of happen. Also, it was, I think, the first time I ever heard Sonic Youth. And so it was like this shift of like being into punk and getting into hardcore. And then in that mid 80s period of like things really started to get really interesting, where it started to become like the hardcore punk stuff started to become kind of kind of the same thing over and over again, kind of becoming stale. And there was some exciting like heavier bands that were Corrosion of Conformity and The Accused and Dr. No and all these bands that were also had like heavy metal influence coming in, and also these other weirdo bands and also at the same time in our neck of the woods there was bands like Beat Happening starting.
Oh yes.
And that was the first real like connection to our neighborhood that was like the C86 kind of sound, and hearing some of the more jangle pop stuff, because we liked like some of the Paisley Underground stuff from LA, like 3 O'Clock and Dream Syndicate. All that stuff was great, but in Washington State we really didn't have a lot of that. So locally we'd go to shows and we saw Beat Happening, and this was a whole like, oh, here's a band who is taking in like doing this really primitive music that was really catchy, and also there was so much happening in the era, because I was also like hearing the Velvet Underground for the first time, which is blowing my mind, and then seeing how that kind of connected to bands like Beat Happening and the more kind of naive kind of sound that that eventually I guess they call it twee pop or
yes, twee. That's like that is that term, isn't it? Yeah. So K Records, is that Kelvin, isn't it? Beat Happening.
Yeah.
Yes. So did you? Because there was a very obscure band I remember interviewing called Thatcher on Acid, and when they did an American tour, I think they toured with 7 Year Bitch? Were they? From
7 Year Bitch.
Were they from the West Coast? Actually, was that?
They were a Seattle band, and they were friends of ours, and when me and Patty were in a band back then, we had played with 7 Year Bitch, both when we were first starting out, putting out singles and stuff. Yeah, around 90. Yeah.
So did you then, at that time, did you then sort of go on to college, or did you then start sort of being in bands full time?
Pretty much, yeah. Out of high school, like at that point, like our family, like none of us were, there was no history of going to college or anything like that. It was just basically like once you get out of high school when you're 18, you just go to work. You find a job at the factory or whatever, and then that's it. And so yeah, Patty had been playing in bands since high school and playing in a lot of punk bands in town and in Seattle, and I was playing around with friends and didn't have anything serious going for a few years there, because I was just like mucking about, like just like working odd jobs, and eventually moved to Seattle, and just a lot of just being a part of the Seattle scene, going to shows all the time, staying out till the sun comes up, and just being entrenched in it and trying to get bands going with friends. And nothing happened till a few years later, and I think it was like just through Patty's connections of playing in bands and playing with all the Seattle bands that we started to like meet everybody. But yeah, after high school for a few years there, it was just like partying, going to see bands, just like just like having fun.
Because I'm not sure how it kind of goes, but in this country, we had, like that period towards the late 80s. I suppose there was a bit of a shift, because then ecstasy comes along, and then there's this kind of new wave of I suppose, 18-year-olds who start sort of wanting to get into that dance scene. So we had those bands that moved over, like the Soup Dragons and the Primal Scream, the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays, all started to get a different from that kind of indie rock sound to being much more dance orientated. And then you had the Hacienda in Manchester that created a bit of stuff. But then we also then had 4AD records that brought out people like the Pixies and Throwing Muses. So that kind of early sound of like grunge started to sort of appear as well. So, and then we had other bands like Bloody Valentine and I suppose people like that, which were a bit more sort of, I suppose you could say they were a bit shoegazy, but sort of that change between the 80s and 90s was quite an interesting shift. So by the early 90s, were you in your first kind of proper band at that stage?
Yeah. And it was a similar thing where, probably starting in that late 80s period of like around, 87, where there's a shift of like, there was these bands like Dinosaur Jr. and Sonic Youth were really, the hot bands happening. And it was around that time I remember for the first time hearing, like, I guess 88, hearing My Bloody Valentine, Spacemen 3, and that type of early, especially with My Bloody Valentine, it was like, before they were kind of coined the shoegaze term that was happening. And so that, so it's like listening to all those bands and in America, we also had like Galaxy 500 and a lot of really cool bands happening. And so around 1990, when I finally got it, like me and Patty kind of started a band with friends that were actually like let's take this seriously and like practice and regularly. We were kind of taking all those influences and throwing them all in the mix, because they're like, we were into so much, from like this classic 70s punk stuff to the kind of jangled psychedelic stuff to whatever else is happening, Flaming Lips and Dinosaur and everything. And so so we would just go, there was this party house where there was a basement, and we just started, kind of just making up pretty simple kind of garagey songs. And but all those weird influences were in there. And it was definitely like around 1990, 91 where there was the 90s had not quite, it was just starting, so it wasn't really defined as to what was going on in the underground, because we were still very informed by the 80s. So it was all like, we were still the influences were, everything from the UK stuff, like the Scottish, like Vaseline's Mary Chain stuff, to the American sounds like Husker Du and Dinosaur. And
So, because the UK, I suppose, if you wanted to be a bit of an indie kid or alternative, which is always a bit of a naff title, but we had, like 3 weekly music papers like the NME, Melody Makers, Sounds, but we also had John Peel, who was this great beacon who curated this great show, which was always kind of full of interesting stuff. So he was always kind of first on the scene, really. It was quite diverse, because he played a lot of African stuff and reggae and folk and extreme noise, but he did sort of introduce us all to the Sonic Youth and Big Black and Husker Du, and it was where we heard. But he brought out that he didn't, but he got the Sub Pop 100 compilation that he started playing, and that was a great thing. So sort of 89, I went to the Norwich Arts Centre to see Tad. But it was Nirvana who was supporting them, and that was just at that Bleach, when they just released Bleach. So that was kind of a great moment, hearing Bleach for the first time, which was just brilliant. So were you very excited by that Sub Pop 100 kind of compilation?
It was a pretty big thing, because in Seattle, like, we were such a tiny music community that wasn't very, back then, no one really paid attention too much. It was like the scenes in America that were big were Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Athens. So Seattle was kind of like, no one really thought of anything was going on in Seattle. And there was a couple compilations that came out, Sub Pop 100 being one, and Deep Six was another one on this label called CZ. And they collected all like, well, this is what's happening in Seattle, circa 86. And it was all like Green River, the U-Men, Soundgarden, Malfunction, all these kind of bands doing this weird, heavy, psychedelic kind of music that seemed to be unique to our region. And the Sub Pop thing was cool because Bruce Pavitt, who actually had a great radio show, and he had a great column in our local paper, the Rocket, the music paper, the Sub Pop column. And every month you'd grab, or every week, so weekly, I think, bi-weekly maybe, you'd go straight to the Sub Pop column to see what is Bruce writing about. And he would write about these bands like the Wipers or Big Black or, anything he was writing about. It's like, okay, got to find these records, because he's sort of like the John Peel of our kind of area.
Right.
So there was a lot of, there was these bands that would go see that were just our local bands, like Green River being one of the big ones at the time. And and there seemed to be, I guess at the time, I'm sorry, looking back, didn't really realize there was a kind of a regional sound happening until like the more I'd go to see bands and see like, oh yeah, I guess we do have this kind of sound starting to happen. And one really pivotal show was in 1988. Me and my buddy went to see, there was a local band called Lush. This was before they knew that there was the UK band Lush. And Lush was a band that was, the singer was Slim Moon, who would later start the Kill Rock Stars record label. So Slim had told me and my buddy Dave, like, well, if you guys are coming to the show tonight, make sure you stick around for the last band. They're called Nirvana, and you guys, these guys are amazing. They kind of like sound like the psychedelic version of the Melvins or something. And we're like, all right, we'll hang out. And we didn't know, like, that night was the very first night. This is early 1988, where the first year or so of Nirvana's existence, they didn't really use the name Nirvana. They used different names, and they weren't really focused yet. So that show was actually the very first show the band used the name Nirvana. And it was in this old dirty theater, and not very many people there. And I remember them coming out, and at that point they were pretty they weren't wild jumping around or anything yet, and Kurt was pretty static, just standing there singing the songs. And I just remember being blown away. And I remember the songs that night they played, and the intensity, and and walking away from that show that night being like, this band is amazing, like my new favorite local band. And I would go to see them anytime they played locally from that night on. And it was like 88, 89. And then when Bleach came out and all that, and Green River broke up and became Mudhoney, it was like that era was like, okay, now Seattle kind of has this, like 1989 was like, and then those bands going to Europe and the UK, and Everett True writing about them. And then it became like, oh, wow, like we're getting noticed because of our local bands.
Yes.
And that was kind of a cool time for our little scene at that moment.
This is true. I think they had Bad Moon PR who did their press. I remember it.
Wow.
So, yes, it was quite exciting. Actually, that was it's unfortunately my claim to fame that I interviewed Nirvana when they came to the Arts Centre in 89. So there you go.
Oh, cool.
So, yes, and I had no idea which member was which, but I still have the recording. Yeah, and that's actually where I first heard about the Vaselines. And
Oh,
and
cool.
some old blues guy that they kept on about, which I can't now remember. But anyway, they were
Yeah.
very sweet. Well, actually, they described the place as being a real dump, actually, and sort of living under the bridge, or sort of being quite grim. Was it as
Oh,
grim
yeah.
as was it?
Well, yeah, like the story about living under the bridge, I think was all more creating mythology. But I do know that the place they lived, they grew up in a town called Aberdeen, very grim, and I could only kind of maybe equate it to like the Manchester, something that's like very gray, very rainy, just very depressing. And some of those small town, like me and Patty grew up in a small suburb of Seattle, and it was like it's very, just the weather and the mood was always very gloomy and gray. And uh you're out in the sticks, and it was, like kind of like disconnected from, the city. And it was like, they especially Nirvana, they really did come from a real, you know backwoods little town that was depressing, and very like lower middle class kind of uh families, and jobs were few and far between, and working at the lumber yard, or the gas station or whatever. So it really was like, they really did come out of, and a lot of the bands in Seattle weren't actually coming from the city. They were coming from, like Screaming Trees came from Ellensburg, that were like way out in the sticks. So there was a lot of, and I think that lent itself to a lot of these bands just having time to work on their craft, and to be in the basement and to write songs, and kind of uh, create their own kind of sound without too many influences kind of seeping in. There'd be stuff they heard, but I think each band had its own identity, because they were sort of, kind of disconnected from each other. And
Yes.
but the mood of and because a lot of the music was very heavy and depressing, and it did kind of, there wasn't a lot of power pop or stuff coming out of the region, aside from a few bands like the Fastbacks, who were amazing. Um, but a lot of it, really was, I felt, informed by the environment of it being so kind of gloomy, just like, similar to the Factory Records kind of thing, and
Yes.
that sort of vibe. Yeah.
Yes, I suppose the sound of Joy Division. Yeah, because I remember hearing Kerosene for the first time by Big Black, and that was quite grim. And then No Recess on the Bleach album
Yeah.
as well, which was again
Yeah.
kind of like quite amazing. So then, so what was the kind of the first band that you sort of became, sort of got a label? What was that particular outfit?
Oh yeah, that was the band Sybil, which was the band me and Patty formed with our friends. We'd actually played a few local shows in Seattle, and there's this guy Blake Wright who came to one of our shows, and we did a cover of a old '70s punk band, the Vibrators.
Oh
There
yes,
was a song called "Baby Baby Baby," and we really loved that song. So we're like, oh, let's do a cover of that song. And just so happened that Blake, who ran this little indie label, loved the Vibrators, and he like fell in love with our cover of that song. And at the show, he saw us, and he was like, "Hey, do you guys want to put out a single?" And we're like, "Sure." We'd only been a band like 6 months or something, and we're like, "Yeah, sure." And he had a label called Empty Records. We're a very small indie record label out of Seattle, and we basically just went in, paid our buddy $100 to do a single, and Empty Records pressed it up, maybe 1,000 copies, maybe 500, I can't remember. But that was actually the first label I was on, and first released music, 1991. And we did a couple more singles and a full length album, and it was the timing was crazy because it was 1991 when Seattle was 91, 92 when Seattle was just exploding. So to be just the little local bands in that scene, everyone was getting noticed, everyone was getting letters. These big labels would send these tiny indie labels letters to send me the music of these bands because the record labels didn't know what was happening and they wanted to sign any band that was either from Seattle or indie rock or whatever. So it was a really interesting time to be in a band and playing at that time because it was just all this insane attention you're getting that was so it was pretty exciting. Yeah.
Yes, because your first single on the label is Olympia, then Push Me Down and Dream, isn't it? This is the 3-track. And this was recorded at Wedgwood One Studios?
Yeah. It was just a guy's basement. Our friend Ralph, who was in an amazing band called Feast, who were kind of first wave grunge, kind of forgotten about, but they were a really amazing band. And he just had this little home studio, maybe it was a 8-track recording unit, and very lo-fi, it cost us $100. And I remember, just a very, we just played it all live and recorded it, and pretty scrappy, but it was also, around that time where there was a lot of these bands like Pavement and Sebadoh, and who were very, very lo-fi, and that sound was very appealing at the time because, there was so many, records coming out that were very produced way too, glossy, and it was getting back to that punk rock thing of just slam out these tunes, record them with a few mics, and it's done, and I think there was that wave of lo-fi bands at the time that we were influenced by because it was just kind of getting back to the basics of just minimal minimalism.
Because we'd had the LA hair metal bands, hadn't we? Which we couldn't, with MTV, you just couldn't move for sort of Bon Jovi and Poison, and then you had sort of Aerosmith, and then you had sort of David. Is it Coverdale? Jesus.
Oh yeah, David White Snake. Yeah.
So there was that kind of whole 5 years of musical agony, really, wasn't it? So I can see why there was this reaction and sort of a relief for the next wave to think these guys are. But then we had Guns N' Roses, I suppose, were sort of doing their thing at that time. So yes, that was kind of interesting. So then you followed that up with another single that was recorded in December '91. So you were on a bit of a roll at this stage.
Yeah. We just kept going in every few months, let's record some new songs, and the next single was, I guess, more of an EP because it would we'd try to fit as many songs as we could on the single. So that single, had 4 songs on it, and I think when that came out, we actually went out on tour. We're we have might have been right before that single had come out. Yeah. We went on tour because we have a single out. I guess we should go tour now. So, and we jumped in our van and went down to a West Coast tour through Oregon and California, all the way down to Los Angeles and San Diego, and did some of the tour with a new band at the time, the Muffs, who were amazing.
Oh, the Muffs. They done Kids in America by then?
Not by then. Yeah, they were brand new, and they had maybe put out a couple singles at that point, and so it was really cool to kind of meet them and play with them on tour. And there was this other amazing band from Boston called the Cheater Slicks, who were a great garage band. We played with them. We played this club in LA called Raji's, which was kind of legendary for Nirvana playing there, and played a place called El's Bar, and we played. It was this is 92, and it was it was crazy when we went down to LA. It was like shortly after the LA riots had happened, so it was like kind of like there were still parts of the city that were kind of shut down because of that.
Did you ever cross paths with Concrete Blonde at this stage? Because they had been sort of going for a few years. Were they in your...
I remember them, and I had met one of the members a few years ago in LA, and but back then, I remember really liking the music, and I think Patty had their record, but never back in that time period, never played with them or met them, and there was I remember the LA, there was a lot of really amazing LA bands that eventually we did meet, like when Patty joined Hole, and met a lot of those people, like bands like Red Cross, and ended up meeting like the Danny from the 3 o'clock, and like so many cool LA people. And so going to that tour was interesting because the flyers would say Seattle Sub Pop band Sybil playing, and we weren't on Sub Pop. The press just loved to jump on any band from Seattle. They'd call Sub Pop or grunge, or so it was like just kind of like hyped because of our being from the Seattle scene at the time.
Yes, this is vicious. So when you came to record the album, had there been a lineup change at this stage?
Oh yeah, because it had Patty had left to join Hole, and then we had our bass player had left, and we got another bass player, Simon, who came in, and he was in a few bands from Portland who were like legendary punk bands like Napalm Beach, Final Warning, and he was great on the bass. And so that was the lineup for the new record. And then we had this producer, and it was one of his very first full-length albums. The producer's name was Phil Eck, and it was again, and the drummer, we had Eric Ockrey, was also an amazing drummer who was in an amazing band called Tree People, who turned into Built to Spill. And
oh yes,
and Phil Eck went on to produce, like, he's a pretty sought after producer these days. He's worked with everybody from Modest Mouse and Death Cab for Cutie and so many others that I'm forgetting.
Yes.
But we were all kind of starting out at that time, and we just sort of let's had enough songs for a record and went in, and again, Empty Records put that out, and that was getting near, because that came out in 93, and the band had kind of by, I think, mid 93 had kind of ended, so it was a pretty quick, couple singles, a full-length album, like within that 3-year period. It was all kind of compacted into that short period.
And how did you bring the songs together? Was it a complete band effort, or were you individually all responsible for different tracks, or did two of you write all the material?
It was a pretty collaborative band, and the only thing that we weren't collaborating on was Tammy, the singer, would write the lyrics and melody, and we would just jam or bring in a riff or a bass part, and like, all right, let's kind of work with that for a bit. And it was very quick and very just sort of like off the cuff, and then Tammy would kind of sit in a practice and listen and kind of scribble down some lyrics. And I do a vivid memory of this time period because Everett True had come over to do more stories on the Seattle scene, since he did the Melody Maker? Or he did one of the...
Yes, the Melody Maker.
And so he had come to hang out in Seattle to kind of take in what was really going on in around 91 and 92. And he came to one of our practices, and I remember him just sitting in the corner with little earplugs in, just kind of taking it in, because he really wanted to see, like, local bands in their element, kind of doing their thing. And I thought it was a really, funny thing at the time. And I think he was also in town hanging out with, Kurt and Courtney had a house up there, and he was hanging out with them, and so he was just really trying to absorb what was going on in the city at that time. And but yeah, we were pretty, like, it was pretty loose collaborative kind of band where there wasn't one main songwriter.
Did you feel when you were recording it that the band were going to do that and then it was going to be all over at that stage? It wasn't a sort of a plan that you'd be touring it and then doing another album. Did it feel like
it felt like, it felt like I remember finishing the record and being like, cool, and it came out and I remember it getting like decent reviews in some of the fanzines and stuff, being like, cool, people like it. And it just sort of like, like me and the bass player left the band, and then I think they kind of went on for a few more months and played some shows, and then they kind of all ended it a few months later. And it just seemed like, and at the time we were all pretty young and kind of like, not really focused. And so, I don't think any of us thought like the band was going to break up after the record came out or anything, because I think the plan was like, oh, this is fun, let's keep doing it. But then after the record came out and being at that time period, we were just all like distracted by other things and going in different directions. And the band just sort of like, burned out. But it wasn't like a plan. It just sort of happened,
Blimey.
So then
that was a bit drastic. So then how do you navigate your 90s at this stage? Because then obviously the 90s is shaped by Nevermind, and then we had, Oasis and Blur and Suede appearing and Elastica and all that kind of scene. And also for us, we gone from the Thatcher years to John Major. So the country wasn't quite so poverty stricken. But again, it was still kind of, there was lots of areas which were quite poor, but generally there was a little bit of wealth appearing in this little island of ours. So what was your sort of from 94, where did you navigate? Because obviously Patty's career is kind of going quite astronomically up at this stage, isn't it? So how were you all navigating that?
So after the band broke up, then the plan was like, all right, start another band, get this thing going again. And meanwhile, Patty's on the Saturday Night Live TV show and on the cover of Rolling Stone and traveling the world. And there was also at the time, Seattle had really blown up, and it was like grunge was the hip thing. And there was also a very dark element hanging over the whole scene, and that was the drugs, and that kind of thing was going on. And I had gotten kind of drug into that vortex of the drug world, and and that was kind of going on, with like Hole and Nirvana and stuff. That was also a dark cloud over their world too. And in Seattle, that was happening to where we had started to see, some of our friends in the community, like the first one, Andy Wood, who was a singer of the band Malfunction, who turned into Mother Love Bone. He died of a heroin overdose. And then about a year or two later, Stephanie Sargent from 7 Year Bitch died of a heroin overdose. And it started to kind of kick in, and me and a few other friends were kind of entrenched in that world, and just kind of like, got sucked into the undercurrent of the addiction. And that really sidelined any of our attempts to like, oh yeah, let's start a band and, like trudge forward, because then we were like, oh, we're like now in this dark, druggy world of heroin, and it was kind of a cliche, because it was like, oh, Seattle, like it's all like grunge and heroin and gloomy, and it was sort of like that really was my life back then. It was like that's where I kind of found myself, and it was very bleak, and it was had a tough few years, and in '94, the big hit when Kurt Cobain died, and then it was maybe a month later where Kristen Pfaff from Hole, the bass player, she died. And these are all people we knew, and especially Kristen was a very close friend, and so yeah, that mid '90s period was very dark and very like I really wasn't doing music because I had kind of like got sidetracked by addiction, and it wasn't until like but I do remember and it wasn't all like I was still clued in on what was going on in music because I would go to see some of the happening bands were all coming from the UK, and
Yes.
And Elastica, I remember them, seeing them, Supergrass, Blur. A lot of these bands were kind of replaced what was going on in America. It's like there was a breath of fresh air coming from the UK. And I was still, like conscious enough to be like aware of like, oh, like this is happening, or this new band Oasis is happening. And so but I was still like unable to kind of get music going again because I was kind of in a bad place. And it wasn't until 1997 when I moved to LA, Patty was already down there playing in Hole. So I kind of escaped Seattle in '97 and moved to LA to kind of like to rebuild and start again because to get out of that.
How were your parents dealing with, I don't know, what your, Patty and you obviously not in a great place. How were you sort of navigating that kind of slightly tricky family dynamic when two of the kids aren't doing, Christmas and birthdays and celebrations must have been tricky at times.
Oh, for sure. It was very strange. And it was like with the family, like they had they had gotten divorced when we were young kids, when I was 12 years old. Back in 1980, they had already got divorced. So we're already kind of a broken family. But and on top of that, they both of our parents were alcoholics. So there was that sort of history there. But they were sober. They had gotten sober when we were kids. And so we never really saw them drunk or didn't see any of the really bad stuff. But that did, some of those behaviors came out in the way they kind of definitely in their divorce, and there was some drama around the house for sure. So they, even though it was, definitely tragic for them to have their kids be drug addicts, and they understood that, oh, this is part of the family, in our genes or whatever, like the addiction was part of it. So they understood that it wasn't, it wasn't something on our part that we like completely chose to do. We just sort of like were drawn to it, and our addictions took over. So they knew, and they kind of knew how to handle it because they knew like not to be codependent, and not to kind of let us kind of like go down that road, and they could only do what they could do, and any sort of like intervention might have derailed, might have done more harm than good, which actually did happen, like in Patty's case, where I think the band tried to do an intervention on her, and she, didn't stick. So I think it really came to, they knew that the only way for their kids to get clean and sober is like they really had to come to that conclusion themselves and want it, which eventually happened, and it all kind of worked out. But they were very, they weren't. They handled it very well, I guess, as far as parents with their kids being, on a really bad road. They understood, and when we got clean and sober, they were just very like happy with, that we actually came out of it and went to rehabs and stuff. And got our lives.
My God. So did you manage to sort of get clean before Patty then? Did you get clean in the 90s at this stage?
Yeah. 1997. I jumped on a plane, and Patty sent me a plane ticket, like, come down to LA and you could stay at my place and get, kick your habit and get sober. So I did. And but at that period, Patty was still in Hole, and there was still, the drugs were still kind of happening in that world. But I managed to, from that day on, like, stay clean, and like, started to go to 12-step programs and meet people in the LA music scene, and kind of start rebuilding from there. And I pretty much, never used or drank again after that. I was pretty much like, okay, I'm done. Like, I just need to, get back on track. And
Yes, because it's then musically things get really, I mean, though, good for that, but the music scene then becomes really, in places, horrendous, doesn't it? Because I wasn't there, thankfully, but Woodstock 99, you get all those kind of heavy rap, white dudes bands who are just gonna Limp Bizkit, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all those bands that I'd never listened to. I can't know them. But the lineup, they had 3 women, there was a few black artists, but then it was just white dudes, and it was absolutely horrendous, wasn't it? So what's it like for you then, sort of coming back and thinking, right, music, what's happening? Jeezy queasy, this is not good.
It was definitely a shock, because in 97, I remember, like, when I was first getting sober, and turned on the MTV, and the first thing I saw was the Spice Girls, and I was like, oh my, like, this is what's happening right now. This is the big thing. And also, like, the boy bands were happening, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and all this stuff, and it was like, wow, this is a complete shift from just a few years earlier with Nirvana and all those bands. So, and then to make it worse, then came Limp Bizkit and Korn and all these heavy, like, frat boy kind of bands, rap metal stuff that was just, like, became huge and kind of overtook the musical landscape for a minute, where when I first moved to LA, I was kind of like, I hooked up with some old LA punk rockers, the Flesh Eaters, who had been around for years, and started playing with them, which is really cool because I liked them when I was a kid, and got to meet a lot of the LA punk rock scene people from bands like the Circle Jerks and X and all these great bands. So I was kind of doing that, and kind of, in this other world, but seeing all this, this mainstream music be really, like, just really, not good stuff happening.
No, it's such a buzz between this kind of Kurt sort of talking about feminism and sort of, deep and, meaningful thoughts, and sort of, wanting equality and all that kind of groovy stuff. And then, fast forward a few years, and then you get all these people who, Limp Bizkit and all those dudes who are just kind of, let's smash this place up, you wake up, just kick the shit out of people.
It's very nice. Like, it was like back to, like, jock.
So did you ever see the Woodstock 99 film, just for the,
Oh, I haven't watched it yet, but I'm very, a friend of mine told me I must watch it, because I'm very intrigued by that, because I'm sure it really encapsulates that era.
I will just say it is absolutely exhausting. You go Friday, that's bad. Saturday, it's getting worse. And then they go Sunday, it's even. And you think, well, this is like apocalypse now. How can it actually get worse? It doesn't. And it's like, oh, yeah, it's going to get worse. Yeah.
And that's interesting that kind of was like that Woodstock in the 60s sort of like was the end of, the flower power generation and stuff. But it was actually, for the most part, a positive thing for most of the people. And So Woodstock 99 being a very, it was like Altamont or something, where it was like, oh, this is the 90s started on this positive note. Now the 90s are starting on this horrible, or ending on this very, bleak ending. And it's like, what's next? And it's really interesting how the thing that came next in music was refreshing, because it was 2000, 2001, I think, when all of a sudden the Strokes and White Stripes and stuff happened. So it shifted again back to more like, let's get back to, just like fun rock and roll, and kind of like back to basics sort of punk kind of vibe, which was really good, because then that kind of overtook, the rap rock and all that stuff was still happening, but there was another breath of fresh air as far as like the music, new music happening and stuff.
Yes, I think every 3 to 5 years there's another kind of chapter, another wave of kind of younger kids come along, and they probably think, oh, I'm not really going to be into bands that have been around for at least 5 years. That's somebody, you want to discover that band for yourself. Don't you? You want to go to that little place, see this little band, they're going to be your band. You get the first single and it's like, wow, this is amazing. I love you guys. Yeah. And then you get a bit older, and then you have to sort of start looking, paying your rent and doing those boring sort of adult things. And you can't sort of be so obsessed, spending so many evenings watching little bands in little clubs. So it does happen. So then the years, is this where Midnight Movies appears for you?
There was so when the 2000s started, it actually had for about a year, I joined a friend of mine in Seattle, was in a garage band that he's like, oh, we need a guitar player, or one of our guys quit, and you want to do a tour. And so there was like a period in the year 2000 where I went back to Seattle to join this band, and they were called the Gimmicks, and did a huge US tour with them. And it was all like during that time where places like Detroit were blowing up with the White Stripes and all that stuff, and we played with a lot of those bands, and it was a fun period. And then but I eventually was like, when that tour ended, I was like, I gotta get back down to LA, because things were sort of happening down there. And so, around 2001, 2002, I had started, I had met this girl, Gina, and we were both into the same sort of music. And so we had this, let's, start writing songs together. And we were definitely more coming from a school of more of an art rock kind of thing, where we were definitely more into the krautrock sounds, and there was definitely like a Stereolab influence, and Broadcast and Clinic, and these type of bands who were really inspiring to us. And Gina, the singer, we definitely had a Velvet Underground thing going, and she had, her voice was it had kind of a Nico quality to it, which people would always kind of point out, which was cool. She wasn't trying to affect that. It was just the way her voice sounded. So Midnight Movies started, and me and Gina started the band, and got a friend of ours, Jason, to come in and do synthesizer and key and guitar and bass. And it was just a 3-piece. And that was another thing where LA was really happening at the time, and there was a lot of these bands coming out of the scene, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and Moving Units, the Warlocks, like all these bands were kind of like bubbling under. And we got caught up in the LA scene at the time. And it was still in this era, that early 2000s, where bands were still getting signed to, like not major label deals, but pretty decent indie label deals and stuff. And in Midnight Movies, we did get a label sauce play at one of the local shows, and they, wanted to do a record with us, and we and we were excited because the label Emperor Norton also had a Ladytron and a few other bands that we, liked on that label. So that was another whole beginning of that band's kind of career, which was pretty fun and exciting. A lot of really cool
because
stuff
that label also
happened.
does a lot of kind of house music, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
Felix the House Cat.
Yeah,
and,
Felix the House Cat, and it was a lot of like dance electronic music, and then Ladytron and Midnight Movies were like the token more of rock end of things, and we did have a bit of the electronic kind of like, because we also really liked what like Primal Scream were doing like during Exterminator, and kind of mixing in these elements, and also bands like Broadcast who were on Warp, and the Warp label we really liked stuff that was coming out on Warp, so it was kind of like a cool period of music happening.
Yes. So you brought the first album out in 2004 at this stage, hadn't you?
Yeah.
Which studio did you use for that?
Oh man, I forgot the name of the studio. It's been so long, but I do remember it was in Orange County here in Los Angeles, or outside of Los Angeles, and the producer, this from the UK, Fulton Dingley was his name, and he was he had worked with Stereolab.
Right.
And some of these people who we kind of hooked up in our world were very like, because we had played a show with Stereolab, we'd played a show with Broadcast, and we gave Broadcast our little burnt CDR demo thing, and we heard from them. They said, "Oh, we really like your demo. Do you want to, play some shows with us?" And Stereolab's manager Martin liked us, and he's like, "Oh, Stereolab's producer want to work with you." Also, I really was in love with this graphic designer Julian House, who had done work for Primal Scream, like Exterminator, Evil Heat, and he did Stereolab Broadcast. He even did some stuff for Oasis and Razorlight and some bigger bands. But I was able to ask the label, can we get Julian House to do the artwork? And they agreed to that. So I was able to talk to him, and he did all the cool graphic design for the 2 records we did. And it was really cool because a lot of these bands I really were inspired by and liked, and we were kind of getting into their world, and we went on tour with a few other favorites of the time, Clinic.
Right, yes.
Yeah. And Luna, who were Dean Wareham from Galaxy 500's next band, and he liked us, and we went on tour with them. Blonde Redhead was another one. There was a lot. It was like in that period of time where a lot of it was like the internet was still really influential for bands at that point. And if you were like on Pitchfork or one of these blogs and you got a good review, people would really pay attention. And luckily Pitchfork did like our music, because it was sort of like rough if you got a bad review back then from some of those sites. But it was a really and the recording of that first record was really fun, we actually went and ended up going to the UK and Europe for a little run of shows and press during that time period too. So it was pretty exciting. Yeah.
Yes, that's amazing. Actually, how was Fulton to work with? Because he'd got an amazing CV. I mean, the amount of bands he's done over the decades is extraordinary. Was that Did you have a nice experience in the studio working with him?
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, he was great. He was very easygoing, and he had some really cool creative ideas that he would kind of like, throw out there, and it was more of a fun, creative recording process where, we'd just have like, oh, I got an idea, let's try this, and he'd be like totally, into trying little tricks or weird ideas that we had. And it was a really pleasant experience, like working with him.
Yes, because you have about 3 years, and then you bring out your next album, Lion the
Yeah.
Girl, don't you? There's a few personnel changes and also different producer. What's it like as the decade is strolling on at this point?
So we had toured and did a lot of things off that first record, and then so the next record, Jason, the other guy in the band, had left, so we got this drummer Sandra Vu, who was excellent, and she went on later to play in the Dum Dum Girls, and then we had another guy in the band who did synth and bass, Ryan Wood. And so it was now a 4-piece, and part of that was because Gina, the singer, wanted to be up front singing, because she was actually the drummer and she sang, which was a really interesting thing for that first lineup, where she was back there playing the drums and singing, which is kind of a unique thing.
Yes.
But she couldn't really continue. She really wanted to like be up front and sing and maybe play keyboard. So we kind of shifted the lineup. And we recorded that record, Lion the Girl, in Seattle. And we had a few producers who we were talking to, and the one that kind of was exciting was Steve Fisk, who was a Seattle guy who I was familiar with because of his work with Screaming Trees, and he did some work with Nirvana, and had been around the scene, early on in Seattle back to the late 70s, and also he's an experimental musician and into really cool stuff. So we decided, let's go up to Seattle, record with him, and we went to this place called Robert Lang Studios, which was this house, and in the basement, which was all made of rock, was this cool recording studio where a lot of bands had recorded there, like Nirvana did record there, and you pretty much live in the house and record there. So, we were there for a couple of weeks, just living and recording. And again, it was, with Steve, he was super fun to work with, and he had so many great stories about working with a lot of the Seattle bands who are also friends. And but to hear some of the behind the scenes stuff was great. And he had all sorts of cool vintage gear and old Farfisa organs and echo tape loops, Echoplex, and so it was a really fun, probably more of a loose experience. And with Fulton, it was kind of like we didn't have a lot of time, and it was very like, get this done. But with Steve, it was a little bit more. We had a little bit more time to kind of stretch out and try new things. And then we went to his house where he had to do the overdub and mixing at his own house, which was nice. Again, it was a really cool experience, and it was also really nice to be back in Seattle and to be recording, like, from my first experience, the first single I ever did, which was just in this very lo-fi, situation, $100 studio with a few mics, to then years later to be in a super fancy, nice recording studio making this record with a well-respected producer. It was it was pretty cool.
Yes, absolutely. And were you pleased with the final results of the album? Were you?
Yeah, there was definitely and the thing I guess I remember about it was that we had also switched labels, because Emperor Norton had been something strange. I think they had been bought out by Rykodisc or something, or it was like,
right,
some strange thing where then, so that left like some of the bands, like I remember, I can't remember who Ladytron went with, but we ended up going with a label called New Line, which was a movie production. Like, there was New Line Cinema, which was a movie. And I was familiar with that because I remember, that's the movie production company that puts out John Waters movies. So I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yes.
But they had started a record company, and one of their A&R guys had seen us, and actually James Eastaugh from Smashing Pumpkins had seen us, and he was working for New Line, and he initially was like introduced us to the label and was like, you guys should sign with this. And James had his little imprint called Scratchy, which he would put out, singles for bands. So James Eastaugh was sort of like the guy who introduced us to this other label, and we ended up going with them. But I do remember it being like when that new record was getting worked on, that there was definitely like it was interesting to kind of have a bigger budget and also have some of the label people, they got to kind of have a say, and like, oh, you should, the artwork should look like this, or maybe not have the song on the record. Or so it was interesting to be like, oh, this is kind of getting into that weird major label world where they kind of tell you, like their opinion, even though they're not in the band or anything, they're gonna tell you what they think. And that was an interesting dynamic to be like, oh, this is different than the kind of DIY punk world I was used to.
Yes.
So it was sort of like, it's like, wow, okay, I guess that really does exist in this world where the more money and more people involved, the more opinions and voices kind of interject into your creative process. So, but in the end, it all worked out fine, and the record came out, and we, ended up going on tour with Clinic and Blonde Redhead and doing all that stuff during that period. And so it was still like a good run of stuff that happened after that record came out.
Yes. And then how long did the band last before?
It lasted about 7 years. And then again, it was like after about a year of touring or so, our singer Gina just was just like, I want to shift gears and do something else. And and we were all kind of like at that point, like, a little bummed that was the end of the band. But again, we're like, all right, well, I guess, everything comes to an end at some point, and we could all, move on to other things. And so it was all, it ended, on a good note. We're all still friends. It wasn't anything bad that went down, but it was sort of sad when the band ended, because we were on kind of a good run. But
yes.
But yeah, then it was like, all right, on to the next thing. So that was probably 2007, 2008 when that band ended. Yeah.
Yes. And then, so you have a few years before the next musical, the Death Valley Girls. What happens in between that period?
Oh, so then I was like, then I was just like, I got to work at this big music store in LA called Amoeba Music, which is this huge record store, and started working there, and again just started meeting all sorts of interesting people from the LA music scene, and would just start playing with people and jamming. And there's also a part of the story I forgot to interject, which was during the Midnight Movies era. That Patty was working on Courtney Love's solo record around 2004. And that was another project that I got to be a part of, as far as like co-writing some songs with that project and being in the recording studio, which was exciting to kind of see like, oh, this is how the real big major, label situations work.
Yes. Because was this her first solo album that you worked on?
Yeah, America's Sweetheart in 2004, I think it was.
Because I remember John Peel, he was always quite touched by Courtney. I think he'd seen her at Glastonbury Festival, and she'd been particularly nice to some of his children, and he took a particular kind of, well, that's really nice of you. I'll plug your solo work. So So America, yes, but that's her only solo album, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's that one thing, and it was kind of made at a strange time. And she was still kind of like, didn't have all her stuff together, was still very chaotic kind of situation. So the record came out, and yeah, it didn't quite take off as it should have, and it was kind of a disorganized and chaotic period for her. So yeah, I don't think she was really ready to, to.
Because you collaborate with quite a bit of the songwriting on that, don't you? You write
Yeah,
the kind of most of it is kind of collaborations with all of you, which is quite
yeah,
interesting. So do you then, in that process, are you all sitting there in the studio or in the rehearsal and sort of working on different ideas, trying to sort of formulate some finished product?
yeah. Because there was different people who I didn't work with in the room, but had songwriting on the record, like Billy Corrigan, and but I did work with the producer Linda Perry, who was in the band Four Non Blondes. We were writing together, and showed Courtney a few ideas, and so yeah, there was a couple songs that were actually the lead off single Mono was a collaborative thing between me and Patty and Courtney, and I think Linda might have had a bit on that too. But
Yes.
it was interesting. And then also when we recorded demos for it, we had Steve McDonald, who was in the band Red Cross, come in, and he played on it, which was really cool to play with him because he's amazing. And it was fun. Like I thought some of it turned out pretty cool, and but yeah, I guess at the time it just didn't have the right push behind it or something. But it was but as far as the experience went, it was really it was
Yes.
fascinating.
Well,
Yeah.
it was a bit more showbiz, wasn't it? I think you had Bernie Tool. Was Bernie Taupin also on it as well, or wrote one of the songs?
Maybe it maybe was. Yeah, I don't think I some of the songwriting was done in at other times.
So as we got towards that sort of mid to end of that decade, had things calmed down kind of emotionally with people, or was it still a bit sort of excitable at times?
Yeah, they were starting to calm down, I think, kind of level out, and by that time, and and then and I was so after that kind of time with the midnight movies, and and I had I was just going back to work, and I would just play occasionally with people around town and do little projects here and there, but nothing nothing like really solid until around 2012 or so, when Death Valley Girls started.
Blimey, and this is probably your longest ever band, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Which is
10 years. So
10. So is this your not just a side hustle? But as a musician at this stage, do you manage to do it sort of full time, or do you also have to have a bit of a side hustle?
it's kind of a bit of this thing where I also work. I do other stuff, like I sell records and collectibles on eBay, and I'll work at Amoeba Records, and so it is like a thing where it's like the band does stuff, and then I'll also have other jobs and things to kind of like make ends meet. And so it has been sort of a like whatever's happening at the time, kind of adjust to.
This is true. So you're on Burger Records at this stage, aren't you?
Oh, very early on, it was Burger. Yeah.
Burger.
Yeah.
So your first kind of album is this one called, is it Street Venom at this point?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So how did you was it the 4-piece at that point?
Yeah, it was like me and Patty had met the singer Bonnie, and she had a bass player friend named Rocky, and we had just got together. Like, Patty knew Bonnie's sister, and they had met because both of their little kids were at the same school, and they were chatting about music and about, Patty told Bonnie's sister, like, oh, my brother plays music, and Bonnie's sister said, oh, my sister plays music, so they should get together. So we all got together, me, Bonnie, Patty, and Rocky, and then just started like jamming and and showing each other ideas. And yeah, it was a pretty quick thing where we had a group of songs together. We were both kind of on the same. We were all on the same page as far as what type of music we were doing. And yeah, it was just maybe a few months later where we we had Burger Records had heard us and saw us play live, and they're like, "Oh, we'll put out a cassette tape for you," and we were like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." So that was the first release.
Yes. And what's it like? I mean, this is quite an interesting dynamic because it's three girls and yourself, or not girls, God, that's terrible. Three women and yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So it's quite an interesting one. Normally this is a ratio which is quite often the opposite of this, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So yes, so what's is that kind of exciting? Do you actually find it kind of like quite interesting to sort of think, oh yeah, okay, this is kind of an totally different kind of vibe that you've had before? I know you've actually worked with a lot of women in bands actually, so it's not completely new to
Yeah.
you. But I just think, with each new lineup, it must be quite interesting. So what was it like with this one?
Yeah, with this one yeah, it was just like I guess as far as I guess it was more focused as far as some of the other bands where it was like the songwriting and stuff um was happening quicker, and there was just more of a chemistry between me and Bonnie's ideas. So it's kind of like a thing where we would both kind of come together with ideas and then show the rest of the band, and they would just like glue it all together. And it was very yeah, very kind of um yeah, it seemed easier than some of the other projects where there was a lot of maybe it took a bit more kind of work to kind of get things together, or it was just like not very well thought out, or more just kind of like just slapped together. Where this one, there was a little maybe a bit more like yeah, I mean, not to say, because Midnight Movies, there was definitely we were very like detail oriented as far as putting the songs together and stuff. But I think with the Death Valley Girls, it was just a quicker kind of songwriting team where we would come up with stuff and then go through the songs, and the and for the type of music we were doing, which was definitely more of a punky garage rock kind of Stooges type of thing, where once we had a simple structure and things that would just sort of click. So I think the dynamic was definitely yeah, it was nice to have that sort of connection in the
Yes.
songwriting.
So your first album, Street Venom, comes out. That's 14. Then Glow in the Dark 2 years later. Is that quite a jump for you musically as a band at that point? Sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of like, we're just getting more comfortable and kind of even stretching out a bit with the music, and again we had another lineup change where we got another drummer and a bass player, and so that added another element to the sound, and we were kind of getting even by that time even getting into more like kind of a few songs that were maybe less like aggressive rock to even more like a dream pop sort of shoegazy kind of vibe even seeping in at that point, which is part of the sound.
Yes, but then because you sort of move to Suicide Squeeze Records, don't you? And then for Darkness Reigns, you bring in sort of saxophone, keyboards, so it has that kind of much more lush orchestral touch. So were you all in agreement of how the band was sort of going to go for the next project?
Yeah, because the songwriting for that was a bit more like, or Glow in the Dark was kind of like random, different recording sessions and stuff, where Darkness Reigns was more focused. And we had our friend Mark Cisneros from so many great bands like Kid Congo's band and The Makeup and so many great bands. He came in to play saxophone, and we had more synth stuff from our friend Greg Foreman, who's an amazing keyboard player, and yeah, so that was sort of like a kind of a shift where we were still kind of had kind of the dark, heavy psychedelic stuff, but also some of the more the pop elements coming out, and that, yeah, it was a bit more of a focused record. And also the first single, Disaster, was the one where we miraculously got Iggy Pop to be in our music video, which was a huge thing to kind of happen for
My
that
God,
record.
amazing. I mean, yes, having two saxophone players, a keyboard player, and another vocalist. Alex James, does she sort of appear on just one or two tracks, or?
Oh, what's the
is there another vocalist on it apart from Bonnie?
There was Jesse Jones was on some tracks on Glow in the Dark, and then on in Darkness Reigns there were some backup singers, a few backup singers, but not for but Bonnie was pretty much doing the main singing.
And did you tour that particular album when that came out?
Yeah. We toured. That one. We had gone to Europe and lots of festivals, and pretty much since Glow in the Dark had come out, we'd pretty much every year been pretty heavy on the touring schedule.
My God, that's amazing. Because then the next album, is that Under the Spell of Joy?
Yeah, Under the Spell of Joy came out.
And that has even bigger lineup, doesn't it? More ambition. So is the record label really pleased with you at this stage? Are you sort of
Yeah, they're very happy. David Dickinson, the guy who runs the label, is amazing and really helped promote, puts a lot behind the records to promote the bands and gives us, a budget for videos and, like really get creative with the art side of it. So Under the Spell again was another little jump up, and and had a lot of guest people on the, we would have all our friends come in to join in, and
yes. But you release it 2020, don't you? This is coming. You record it 2019, I guess, and this is
So it comes out like we record it right as the we finish it right as the pandemic is beginning. We finish it like March of 2020. So then the world shuts down, and we're like left with this record, and that we can't, that's going to eventually be out, that we were unsure of what the future held. And it turned out that the pandemic went for quite a long time. The record came out during that period, and like a lot of bands in our position, all we could really do is just promote it online and without the help of touring, and just put out videos, and even through that it was it was like people responded to it, and it did great, even though we had to wait quite a while before we actually toured on it.
My God, when was the first time you could all meet up and rehearse and go back on? When was your first tour during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it was, I'm not sure if I have the timing right, but it seems to be like late 2021.
Right, yes. 2020 just seemed to be a bit of an odd one, really, didn't it?
Yeah.
At that stage.
And I remember going, because I remember the end of 2021, we got offered a tour with this band who had got back together from the 90s called And You Will Know Us by the Trail of Dead. And
God, I remember that name.
Yeah. So they had put out a new record and were starting a tour again, and they asked us to go out with them for a couple weeks, and it seemed at that point the pandemic was sort of like mellowing out. So we're like, all right, let's go out there and do this, and we did, and it was a couple weeks. It was a lot of fun, and great tour. And then, but when we got home, then there was another big swell in the pandemic where things were getting shut down again, and it was like we kind of got a little taste of touring again, but then there was another few months where things were kind of tough to navigate. And so so at that period we had also recorded the new record, and we were just waiting for that to come out. So
yes. So did you write all of Islands in the Sky? Was this all written during the pandemic lockdown? Whose bubble are you in time?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we pretty much used that time to write that new record and get all that prepared. So by the time we were, ready to tour, Islands in the Sky was, was about to come out. And so it was, but there was quite a wait for that, because again, there was also other elements happening where a lot of the U.S. vinyl record plants were backed up, because a lot of now that all vinyl's all the rage again, and all the major artists like Taylor Swift and like all these Billie Eilish, all these people have their records on vinyl, and they get first. The major labels get first. Go at getting their vinyl press. So all the indie labels get kind of like pushed to the back of the line. So again, after recording that record, then we had to wait an extra long time for it to come out. So there was a lot of like touring and festivals kind of in between, as we were waiting for the new record to come out. But we were kind of, it's kind of good just to get back out there and kind of do some touring behind Under the Spell of Joy, since we really didn't get to do proper tours for that.
Yes, God, that is tough. How did you cope with the kind of the dreaded lockdown period?
It was so strange, because there really wasn't anything to do. You're just sort of like at home, and it really was just like being like working on little creative things, and since that the Under the Spell of Joy record was still in still getting sent to the mastering and all that, like in the meantime I was able to do like the artwork for the album and put all that together, which I'd been doing for a lot of the Death Valley Girls stuff, is like the graphic design work for the record art. So I would spend time like, I'm going to work on some ideas for that, or maybe some, just like anything to keep busy, or maybe try to think up some new ideas for new songs. And it was, it really was a very strange time to be, just sort of like isolated,
Yes, absolutely. But last year you were touring quite a lot, weren't you? You even went to Australia at one stage.
Yeah, it was a pretty relentless year of touring for Islands in the Sky, where the record came out and we directly went to Europe and the UK, and came home and did South by Southwest in Texas and a big tour around that, and went to Mexico for a couple weeks, many festivals, and ended up the year with a trip to Australia, which was amazing and just like a mind-blowing experience. And
Oh my God, that's fantastic. Is there any particular country that take you to heart? Because often people in Britain say, "Oh yeah, the Italians love us," or the Spanish.
Oh yeah.
Do you have a particular country that sort of you suddenly find you've got an amazing audience who know all the lyrics?
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, it's tough, because it seems to be like, everywhere there's little pockets, like everywhere. Like whenever we, play in London or Manchester, I always think we have good shows there, and definitely in Berlin, like going to Germany, like Berlin's always a really great time. Love playing there. And Spain, like the times we've been there, and Barcelona, and there's so many. And then being in Australia was amazing, because it was our first time there, so a lot of people weren't familiar with us, but and we got to play with our friends Frankie and the Witchfingers, who already have a following there, which was great. But it's really hard to kind of really think of like what the one spot that I really think is a lot of fun, because there's just so many. Like I always, because I'll think of one, then oh yeah, but I forgot about this other
Yes.
spot. Yeah.
And how was the UK? Did you say you did UK or just Europe at that stage?
Yeah, we did UK, and like Brighton, Manchester. It was freezing. We played outdoors in Manchester, and it was freezing cold, but super fun.
Yes.
London, always great. Yeah.
Excellent. And then, so with 2024, what's
Yeah.
your going forward? Yes, what's the state of play?
So now, okay, whole new kind of thing going on. So so I recently like am left Death Valley Girls. Like this is fresh, stuff where I'm working on some other some other music projects, and yeah, this kind of just happened where it's like, okay, I'm going to shift gears and do some other stuff. And Bonnie with Death Valley Girls, they're going to go forward with the band, and they do have a European tour coming up in the springtime, and then I'm assuming have another record that they'll be working on.
Was that all in the kind of pipeline last year that this was going to happen, or was it a decision made over Christmas?
It was over kind of the holidays, where there was things that I was kind of thinking of doing, and kind of like looking at the new year and what was going to happen, and since Death Valley Girls did all our touring last year, and it was so packed with stuff, that this year there was, as far as what was going on, there was going to be a tour, but there's going to be more just like focusing on writing a new record. So I thought, and I was always like working on other stuff, and I felt like, well, if now might be the good time to, if I step away from it, and then I could work on these other projects. And Bonnie really wants to focus on the new Death Valley Girls stuff. So it was sort of a, mutual agreement of like, like if any time, or if I were to like leave the band, it were, like now is probably the best time, to where there's not a lot of stuff, commitment for me to have to cover while I'm working on other stuff. So everything is all great. I'm still like, on good terms and everything, but it was just like, another, as my musical career has gone, it's always shifting and moving on to the next thing. So it's just been like, and it's been crazy that I've been doing this for 10 years, because that's like such a long time to be doing one band. But it's also like, all right, now let's, shift gears and move on to this other thing. And, so it's just like the ongoing kind of adventure of like.
Yes, my God, there you go. So you're not going to be doing Europe or the UK in sort of March, are you? You're not doing those dates. My God, that's So have you got a band, or are you looking at sort of other projects at this stage? Or
I've been writing some music at home, and talking with a few other friends about things, but nothing totally congealed yet as a band. But it's just more of like, the ideas and things are there, and just wanted to kind of like, kind of just give myself space to take a break, take a breather, and then work on new music, and then kind of like, go from there.
Yes, I guess you are in your mid-50s now, aren't you? So another tour. I guess touring gets quite hard work, doesn't it? After
it does. Yeah, it's pretty like, there's a lot of fun and adventure, but it also like, especially like, this last year was pretty exhausting and pretty intense. So it's like, all right, it'll be nice to just, take a break from that and get back to just like, focusing on writing some new music and stuff, without the idea of like, oh, there's another tour coming and there's this other stuff. It's like, just kind of getting back into the basement and working on new stuff.
Yes. Are you can you see yourself in 6 months' time bringing together a new lineup and a different sort of musical moment?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of like going to just see how it all, progresses. But yeah, that seems to be a yeah realistic time period of like having something up and running again, and you know starting over. It's like every few years I'm like, okay, now this thing ended, and then going on to this, and going on to that. So it's just like, yeah, just keeping the creative juices flowing. But yeah, hopefully in that time period I'll have
Yes.
something new happening.
That's amazing. Do you think you'll ever? I know Patty had a sort of film that I watched come out. Do you think you'll ever sort of try and archive your sort of musical journey? Because you must have quite a lot of material, and also archiving of sort of posters and flyers and photographs. Have you ever been tempted to start thinking about how to sort of put all that together?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people have asked me about that, like about all the flyers and posters and ticket stubs and stuff. And yeah, and I've always kind of thought about that, and I've always kind of like been in a way sort of sharing and archiving things on like social media, like on Instagram, where like I'll post a flyer or poster from a show and be like, oh, this is an Urbana show from 1989, and this is what happened, and like usually like to tell a story behind that piece of memorabilia. And
Yes.
just been doing that. And I think in a way that is sort of like a cool and easy way of kind of like sharing the stories, and sharing the bit of memorabilia that people really like to yeah to hear about that stuff. So yeah, I don't know if I'd love to put out a book or something one day, but for now I'd really enjoy like the interaction on social media where I share stuff, and been meeting lots of cool people into music, and who, and especially younger kids who are really interested in that, especially the early 90s scene in Seattle, who just love to hear the stories. And
Yes.
so yeah, I really have fun like yeah, sharing that stuff.
I know at the end of last year, I did an interview with the cello player from MTV. The was her name Laura Goldston.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Did you
yeah.
ever?
Cool.
Because she was doing some art project that was getting recorded in East Anglia in the UK. So
Yeah.
yes, and I thought, oh, that'd be interesting. When I saw her name, I did an interview, and she talked a bit about Seattle and how it changed. House prices changed quite radically, didn't
Oh
they?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yes, someone got rich on that, didn't they? But anyway,
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
always it's always the way, isn't it? I guess that happens
Yep.
with a lot of cities. I mean, if you could have whispered something to your like 16-year-old self starting out, is there anything in particular that you'd oh yes, that's a good idea, even if that person would have ignored it? But I just wondered, with all your experience and kind of journey, what key things have happened that you might have thought, yes, that would have been really good to have known.
Um, yeah, I guess it is that thing of like, like I guess I would have told that kid like not to get discouraged, and like life is full of many ups and downs, and when yeah, like to you know be grateful and cherish the good stuff, and if things are going, you feel they're not going your way, like not to give up, to like just to uh kind of move forward, and change is good, and not to not to um let things kind of like drag you down, like because yeah, life is just like such a strange journey, that there's so many unexpected things that you would never imagine happening, and they do, and it's like really exciting. And I think yeah, just to tell that kid like, yeah, don't be discouraged, and like keep doing what you love, and like things just happen, like they just happen when you follow your heart. So
Yes.
I think that's kind of it, because in life I've kind of like been discouraged or kind of had tough times, and and it's just sort of like trying to keep a positive attitude, because change is just inevitable in life, and you never know what's around the corner.
No, that's right. And is Patty keeping well, by the way?
Oh yeah, she says hi. I told her I was
Oh,
going to
good.
interview today. Yeah, she's doing great. Yeah, she's just take her hanging out with her 13-year-old daughter today, and she's keeping busy and doing really good.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so pleased. God, I really loved meeting her, actually. She was so excited about that indie scene, which I was like, oh, wow, that is
Yeah,
incredible. Big Flame, Stump, all those kind of
yeah,
bands. She loved them
yeah.
all. It was like, God,
So cool.
that was very impressive. But look, Larry,
Yeah.
thank you ever so much for this. And if you want, I can always send you the link, and you can always
Oh, cool.
put it on your social media page and
Yes.
and use it elsewhere. But look, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank
That's
you
been
so much.
amazing. And
Yeah.
I'm probably going to go to bed soon, actually. But
Yeah, what time is it over there?
It's 11 o'clock. It's 11.
Oh, wow.
So there you go. But anyway, that's all good. So yeah, have you ever played in Norwich, by the way? Norwich in the UK?
No, never played there. Yeah, that's one spot I can't recall playing.
I guess you do sort of London, Bristol, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester,
Yeah, all
Liverpool,
that.
all those,
Yep.
but not quite on the sort of other side. Well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you came to the UK last year for your tour with the band. And yes, well, hopefully you get to tour again soon in the next few years. But anyway, look, thank you again for your time. It's been amazing. And
Yes.
I'll let you go. But look, have a lovely day. And I'm going to go to bed. Anyway, thanks, Larry.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yes,
All right.
take care. Cheers. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, if you're still with us, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Larry Schemel for giving me the time for that interview. I will give you some links to how you can find out more about what he's up to. I think if you go to his Facebook page, it's all there and much more. This has been the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, or Podbeam. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.